Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're looking into Mavis Josephine McKay, and she died, it says August 13th in 1957, and this is going to throw off my dates in the order that they were in the playlist, but I decided I wanted to add these in there, so we're going to look at this. This is from the Yakima Herald Republic. I may not read all of it, but if I stop reading it, I'll scroll down so that you can pause it and read it if you want to read more of it. And I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Umatilla woman seeks answers for more than 64 years after her mother was murdered on Yakima reservations. And it says Mildred Anne, I don't know how to pronounce that either, Quaempt slowly rose from her seat in the Legends Casino Event Center in Toppenish on December 2nd. She paused as she prepared to talk about her mother, Mavis Josephine McKay. It's hard, she said. Her words echoed through the expansive room, usually reserved for musical performances and large gatherings. Because of the pandemic, only a few dozen people were there in person for the hybrid meeting of a new state task force for missing and murdered indigenous people. Mildred had traveled with close friends from the Umatilla Reservation in Oregon, 2 hours away, to attend a Umatilla tribal citizen like her mother. Mildred has many connections to the Yakima Reservation. She comes to see relatives and friends just as her mother did. She comes for powwows and events centered on traditional languages. Mildred speaks the Umatilla language frequently, along with the Warm Springs and Yakima dialects, and often switches between Umatilla and English. I'm standing here on behalf of my mother and all those that were left behind, Mildred said, her voice trembling. We want something done here, not just today, but every day forward. Her 32-year-old mother was found floating face down in an irrigation canal west of Toppenish on the morning of August 13th, 1957, less than a mile from the casino and attached hotel. The lateral canal runs alongside the city's Elmwood Cemetery. A cemetery employee riding to work in the back of a pickup saw Mavis as the truck crossed a small bridge over the canal. Mavis died of a broken neck. Then Yakima County Coroner Ralph Shary said after an autopsy, there were multiple bruises and abrasions on her back and legs, and a severe bruise on the top of her head. She was nude, a single gold earring in one ear. Police on horseback rode along the dirt banks of the canal looking for her clothing. They never found it. The autopsy showed no water in the woman's lungs. There is a strong possibility she was murdered. Louis B. Harwood, a criminal investigator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, initially told reporters. Mavis was discovered around 8 a.m. and had been dead for about 4 hours, according to the autopsy. Mildred was 4 years old. Her brother was a teenager. Her younger brother was only a few months old. When she was a girl, Mildred started asking who killed her mother. Don't talk about it, her older brother said. Just never mind now, an aunt said. Quit bringing that up, a cousin said. Authorities never contacted Mildred about it over the years, as she became a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother. On Friday, she spoke to 2 senior investigators from the Washington Attorney General's office who are gathering information about the case. Mildred cried when she got the call. Finally, after so much time, authorities were asking about her mother. I just want justice, just like anyone else, she said. I just know I'm going to plug away until I can't talk anymore. Mavis is among dozens of indigenous women and girls and men and boys who have disappeared, have been found murdered, and have died mysteriously within and around the 1.3 million acre Yakima Reservation in Yakima and Kittitas counties. Their deaths and disappearances date back to the formation of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation by treaty on June 9, 1855 and before. Few cases have been solved. The epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous people is a national and international crisis rooted in colonization and complicated by non-existent or unreliable data, a lack of urgency by and widespread distrust of authorities. a daunting jurisdictional maze in which cases can slip through cracks in layers upon layers of bureaucracy. It can also be challenging when a citizen of one tribe disappears or dies on another reservation, or in urban areas or other states. After a few short stories and sparse quotes from the BIA official in local newspapers, Mavis' case went cold. Related paperwork was boxed and moved to warehouses. Jim Curtis, the Yakima County coroner, recently found Mavis' death certificate online after several attempts to locate a physical copy. He's still searching for the autopsy report for Mavis. The physical and sexual violence that indigenous women and girls throughout the United States have suffered for decades is staggering. According to the Association on American Indian Affairs, 84.3% of American Indian and Alaska Native women, 4 in 5, will experience violence in their lifetime, and 56.1% of American Indian and Alaskan Native women have experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, the organization reported on its website. Other tragedies have hit the family over the years. One of Mildred's 5 children, Mavis Mayanne Kirk of Warm Springs, was killed when she was run over after a holiday party on December 16, 2009. No one was prosecuted. The mother of 2 was 31. A niece who disappeared in August 1997, Lisa Pearl Briseno, I don't know if I pronounced that right either, is still missing. The Warm Springs tribal citizen was last seen with her boyfriend in Portland. She was 28 then. The pain from such loss never leaves. Mildred's memories of her mother are faint, almost non-existent, but she has always missed her mother and wants to know what happened to her. She would also like a photo of her mother, making a polite plea for anyone who knew her mother, and has a photo of Mavis to share it with her. Mildred doesn't have one and barely remembers her face. Little news, less information. In 2019, Mildred stood at her mother's grave in the small cemetery behind Tatua Presbyterian Church outside Pendleton. A strong summer breeze ruffled the tall grass over the flat granite stone. Mildred picked up a chipped decorative plate with the words "To Mother with Love" and gently leaned it and a small hand mirror against the simple gravestone. And I'll scroll through it so that if you want to read it and pause it and read it, you can do that, because I don't want to read it all. But I just want to add this into my playlist so that it's there. This says those who found Mavis in the canal first contacted Toppenish police, who were joined by the Yakima County Sheriff's Office, the BIA, and FBI, according to the newspaper reports. Investigators didn't suspect foul play initially. Harrah, the county coroner, said Mavis may have suffered a broken neck by diving into the canal. Wow. When searchers couldn't find her clothing and the autopsy yielded more information about injuries Mavis had suffered, her death was ruled a homicide. But if they hadn't found all that, and if she had sat there for a lot longer, they wouldn't have known it was a homicide. They would have thought it was an accident. That's why some of those ones where they say they drowned, I always think, oh, maybe not. Maybe they didn't drown. Maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was a homicide. And I'm not the only one. There are others that think that. Oh, sorry. I think I lost my place. Sorry. It just scrolled too fast. But you can find it. I'll scroll to the top and you can see what you want to search for. If you Google search for it, this is what you search for. So if you want to find it, this was published March 27th, 2022. And And then we also have this. And this is Oregon State Police Report on Missing and Murdered Native American Women. It says Listening and Understanding Tour House Bill 2625, September 2020. Introduction. In 2019, Oregon State Legislature passed House Bill 2625, which directed the Oregon State Police to conduct a study focused on increasing and improving the reporting, investigation, and response to incidents involving missing and murdered Native American women. A multidisciplinary Missing and Murdered Native American Women work group was established with representatives from Oregon State Legislature, federal, state, local, and tribal partners. A number of factors make it difficult to gauge the scale of this problem. Themes that surfaced in the data analysis and listening and understanding events included inconsistent data sharing and reporting of crime statistics, confusing and inconsistent access to law enforcement resources, and under or non-reporting of missing persons in the Native American community. Through listening and conversation with tribal partners and community members, the work group gathered information on the scope of the problem, identified barriers to effective use of the current system, and examined ways to create partnerships to increase reporting, identification, investigation, and rapid response to both future and past cases of missing and murdered Native American women in the state. The Missing and Murdered Native American Women Work Group identified barriers to reporting of missing Native American women included crime data and information shared between some tribal governments and local, state, and federal partners. Governments is not consistent and in some instances is not occurring. Confusing processes, communication breakdowns, and historical distrust of government have led many of the Native American community to hold negative perceptions and emotions toward law enforcement and the outcomes of criminal investigations in tribal communities and urban areas. Native American communities in Oregon indicated that there is a lack of trust between their communities and governments, including law enforcement. Participants in each of the listening and understanding events expressed these barriers have impacted Native American communities negatively. When crime or missing persons reports were made, participants reported based on their experience. They did not expect police to act, expect to be believed, or to be taken serious. Always know where to report. Expect prosecutors to prosecute offenders, tribal or non-tribal members. Receive communication or follow-up from police. Get the opportunity for involvement in plea negotiations from prosecutors. As a result of the listening and understanding events, there are indications the number of missing Native American women from tribal lands and from urban areas of Oregon may be underreported. Considering the information gleaned, the listening and understanding events, the Missing and Murdered Native American Women Work Group determined there are many areas where improvement, change, investment, and focus could be directed with the goal of creating lasting, positive impact for the tribal nations located within Oregon. The work group has the following 4 recommendations aimed at increasing the reporting of missing people to law enforcement, reducing the number of victims of violent crime, and increasing the knowledge and skills of law enforcement in navigating complexities between tribal and state laws. Establish a partnership between Oregon law enforcement and the new federal task force, Operation Lady Justice, towards solving open and cold case missing person investigations. Develop collaborative efforts, partnerships, and protocols to work across local, tribal, and state borders to identify patterns and links between missing persons from tribal and non-tribal lands. Strengthen and create partnerships between law enforcement and Native American communities, and continue outreach to all Native American communities in Oregon on the issue of missing and murdered Native American women. Develop and provide education for Oregon's law enforcement officers, covering cultural awareness, the history of Native Americans in Oregon, and the complexities between tribal and state laws. The Kirk Greeley family. In investigating the issue of missing and murdered Native American women in the state of Oregon, one cannot help but see the impact on communities and families. During the study, work group members met members of the Kirk Greeley families who shared the stories of the ways they have been impacted by the loss of women in their family. The Kirk Greeley family has experienced and lived with the deaths and disappearances of family members. While this family is not the only family impacted by the death or disappearance of a loved one, their experiences include many of the aspects the missing and murdered Native American women work group set out to understand. The Kirk Greeley family is a very large Native American family with members living in Warm Springs, Umatilla, and Yakima, and in urban areas of Oregon and Washington. They are a regular presence at events for missing and murdered Native American women, wearing red t-shirts and pins designed by Merle Kirk Greeley, both depicting Mavis Kirk Greeley, who was killed on the Warm Springs Reservation in 2009. Mavis's grandmother, Mavis Josephine McKay, was murdered in 1957 on the Yakima Reservation when her mother was very young. Mavis McKay was a member of the Confederate tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. The Kirk Greeley family has also lived with the unanswered questions and loss surrounding the disappearance of another female family member. Lisa Pearl Briseno, Mavis's cousin, was living with her boyfriend in the Portland area when she disappeared. Lisa has been missing since 1997, leaving the family with no idea where she might be or what might have happened to her. The story of the Kirk Greeley family is a very personal example of what Native American families are experiencing on tribal lands and in urban areas in Oregon, in the United States, and in Canada. During the 2019 Oregon legislative session, Representative Tana Sanchez of the 43rd Oregon House District introduced House Bill 2625, directing the Oregon State Police to conduct a study focused on increasing and improving the reporting, investigation, and response to incidents involving missing and murdered Native American women. HB 2625 passed the Oregon State Legislature and after signature by Governor Brown went into effect in July of 2019. In response, the Oregon State Police established the Missing and Murdered Native American Women Work Group. This group included individuals from multiple disciplines in local, state, federal, and tribal systems. Members were charged with traveling the state on a listening and understanding tour to gather information needed to help grasp the breadth and magnitude of this crisis in Oregon. Members of the Missing and Murdered Native American Women Work Group traveled to Native American nations throughout Oregon and to urban locations in Corvallis and Eugene. Through listening and conversation with tribal partners and community members, the work group gathered information related to the scope of the problem, identified barriers, and examined ways to create partnerships to increase reporting, identification, investigation, and rapid response to both future and past cases of missing and murdered Native American women in the state. To the extent that the data exists on reported incidents of missing and murdered Native American women and our proximity of Native Americans to law enforcement, these data are relatively easy to gather. To gather the data related to increasing and improving the reporting, investigation, and response to incidents involving missing and murdered Native American women as directed in HB 2625, members of the Oregon State Police constructed a working group of members representative of multiple disciplines at the local, state, federal, and tribal systems. The group planned a series of outreach events to present opportunities for Native Americans living in Indian country defined as 18 U.S.C. 1151 as reservations and other lands set aside for Indian use, such as Indian allotments and lands held in trust for Indians or Indian tribes. Outreach events were also scheduled in urban areas of the state to provide Native American people living in urban areas opportunity to describe in their own words the difficulties, barriers, and persistent obstacles encountered in reporting someone missing or navigating the criminal justice system when a family member is the victim of murder. The work group reached out to the tribal governments of all 9 federally recognized tribes as well as advocacy groups in urban areas to schedule events for the work group to listen to the experiences of Native American people, understand the obstacles from their perspective, and look for opportunities to better serve the Native American community in extremely important and sensitive investigation circumstances. So, I'm not going to read all of this, but I will scroll through it so that, and hopefully I won't have problems with it going far ahead. Hold on, yeah. So I'll scroll through it and you can pause it and read it. Right here it says on that date, January 23rd, 2020, there was a total of 1,213 men, women, and juveniles of all races, Oregon, missing persons entities in LEDS. Of the 1,213 missing person entries, 13 of those entries were for Native Americans or Alaskan females. So yeah, you can pause it and read it. There were some graphs with the data they had that they created graphs with. And it talks about access to law enforcement. It mentions some of the tribes. It's pretty interesting, but it's a lot of reading. Well, maybe not a lot, but it would make a long video. Talks about feelings and emotions identified by participants include skepticism, racial tension, bias, historical trauma, systematic oppression, frustration, anger, confusion, tired, fatigue, defeated, collective grief, and fear. And you get frustrated with things like that. You just want to give up. You know, you might walk in trying to do something and you can't accomplish it, you know, and then you just walk out crying. And then it's hard to go back again because, you know, it's a lot of stress. There's some recommendations. I just thought since we were in this area and we're posting on missing people in that area and Jane Doe's in the area, that we should also try to cover some of the people that were killed in the area and some of this information as well because it's important. Anyway, that is the video on Mavis Josephine McKay, who died August 13, 1957. She had a broken neck and was murdered, it says. So, anyway, prayers for her loved ones and her families, because it sounds like they've been through a lot. And thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great day. Bye-bye.